The Candid Frame is supported by donations by listeners just like you. Help us to bring you great conversations with great photographers. Support the show today with your monthly contribution through our Patreon effort at patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or click on the link in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. Thank you.
This episode of The Candid Frame is brought to you by MePhoto, who has just introduced their latest generation of tripod, the MePhoto Air. They're lighter, smaller, more stable, and more colorful than ever. Find out more about this and other great designs by visiting mephoto.com and use the code TheCandidFrame to get 15% off MePhoto purchases. That's MePhoto, spelled MEFOTO.com. This is Ibadi X, and this is The Candid Frame. I enjoy talking to photographers about their personal projects. As much as I may love their editorial or commercial work, it's often their personal work that provides the greatest insight into who they are and what they're passionate about. One of the lessons that can be taken away from these photographers is why it's often a good move to choose a subject matter that you have a passion about. Euan Forrester combined his photography with his interest in off-road biking when he documented the creation of a mountain bike trail near Vancouver. It was a project that offered an interesting challenge for the photographer, which went far beyond just creating the images, but eventually displaying weather-resistant prints along the newly created trail when it was completed. It's an interesting story about how to find and create interesting work with subject matter that is very close to home. All right, Euan, well, welcome to The Candid Frame. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks for reaching out. I was really intrigued by this project that you were working on, the evidence of trail fairies. And you can describe it to us in a minute, but tell us a little bit about your background, because you're not a professional photographer. You're a game designer?
Yeah, that's right. I spent about a decade as a game programmer. Yeah. And then now I work more in like internet security as a programmer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I've been photographing, I guess, kind of semi-seriously for about 10 years. But yeah, no, I'm not a professional.
So what sort of spoke to you in terms of photography? Because, you're sitting in front of a computer a lot of the time for the kind of work that you were doing. What was the appeal of photography to you as compared to what you were doing for a living?
I actually think that was kind of similar to making video games in a way, like kind of using technical things to say something that's, mushy and not clear and I don't know, I don't want to use the word artistic, but like that kind of thing. Telling stories, conveying experiences. I think that's all really similar to video games. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's why.
So did you just start dabbling? How did you sort of start getting into picking up the camera and making photographs?
It actually started when I hurt myself snowboarding. Like I'd been taking pictures like on trips or whatever before that, and I kind of enjoyed it, but didn't really think very much of it. But then one year on my birthday, I managed to wreck my knee snowboarding. And so I was laid up on the couch for about 6 months. And so I was trying to figure out a way to turn a negative into a positive. And I kind of looked over at my little camera and I was like, oh, maybe I should try getting into that. And so I went and bought a big camera and started going to like camera club meetings and whatever as a way to get back outside again. And it just kind of snowballed.
When I look at your website, I see that you seem to have a real affinity for telling stories with your photographs. It's not just about the singular photograph. Tell me about this sort of fascination with sort of telling a narrative with your camera.
I think it actually came from like an internet post that I saw once where it said that what separates good photographers from bad is that they can string pictures together and make them be a cohesive whole. And I was like, well, I want to be a good photographer. And so I looked at my pictures and I was like, oh, these don't string together well at all. And so I kind of like took up that challenge, I guess.
When you looked at your pictures, what did you find that they were lacking? Because you can take a lot of pictures of a similar subject matter, but they don't necessarily play well together. Mm-hmm. And as you just said, a good photographer should be able to do that. So what was the skill that you needed to develop to be able to do just that?
I guess, I don't know. It's tough to put a finger on. I think just for me, I guess it was finding a subject matter that I could return to over and over again, and that kind of had that depth. So at the beginning, I really liked mountain biking, and so I took a lot of pictures of mountain biking, but they were just pretty pictures, and they didn't hang together. So after a while, that kind of, I don't know, I never got especially good at it, but it still became a bit old, I guess. Whereas when I started photographing electronic music parties that my friends put on, and that subject matter I thought had a lot of depth, because I was able to dig into the behind the scenes part of it, and like what goes on to make these parties happen. Why do these people do it? That kind of thing. I thought that was a lot more interesting. I really like reading like accounts of behind the scenes things, mm-hmm. and so the idea of getting to create a behind the scenes account really was, super appealing to me.
Okay, so those are the images that are called soundproof on your site, right?
That's right.
Okay, so tell me the process of taking pictures of that experience of your friends taught you in terms of being able to do a story. What were some of the skills that you feel that you developed that helped you with the project that we're about to talk about?
I think it's the kind of the stamina to approach a project over a long period of time and dig into it, and to become bored with the pictures that you take and push yourself to dig deeper and take other pictures. I think that's the primary one. And then a secondary one, I think, is to try to dig into the emotions that people feel rather than the facts of what they're doing. And that I think kind of goes hand in hand, because you can only photograph the facts so many times. Mm-hmm. But the emotions that people feel, it's much, at least for me, it's much harder to take a picture that really represents that. They come to the surface less often, and they come to the surface in a photographic way less often. And so kind of being ready to capture that and be sensitive enough to capture that, that's a real challenge for me. And that's what I've tried to work on.
Well, that's an interesting comment about moving past what's in front of the camera and sort of just documenting and trying to capture feeling.
Yeah, with my second project, which is about medieval recreation, that was like a complete... That was a complete area that I knew nothing about, and I wanted to try to understand it and then convey it as best I could. But the criticism that I heard about that was that it was just facts. And I guess because I was so overwhelmed with trying to understand the facts that I wasn't able to really dig into the emotions very well. And so for this project about trail building, I think I understood the facts at least a little bit better, and I really tried to concentrate on digging into the feelings instead.
So why don't you tell us about the Trail Fairies project, how that came about, and for people who have not seen the photographs, can you explain what the project was?
Yeah, so for 9 months, I followed two trail builders as they built a new trail in Vancouver, Canada. And after that was done, I made large weatherproof prints of 20 of the pictures and put them up along the trail itself so that people could see how it was built as they were using it.
And tell us about how the whole idea came up with it. You said you're a bike rider yourself. How did you find out about the fact that these two people were going to be working on this extensive project for almost a year? And, how did you sort of find your way to actually document it?
So I knew them through a mountain bike club that we all volunteered at as guides. Like, trail building is often kind of secretive, and as you're beginning a project, you don't want people to know about it so that they don't come and try to find it and kind of tromp through the woods and wreck everything. So it tends to be a bit secretive at the beginning. But because we had these mutual friends, I kind of heard through the grapevine a bit that they were going to be doing this, and so I approached them and asked if I could follow. And the reason that I wanted to do this was that I had wanted to do a project about mountain biking for a long time, but I could never figure out a way to do it that wasn't just making pretty pictures of people riding bikes. And I'd kind of brainstormed different aspects of mountain biking that I thought would be a bit different, but still a way to talk about that subject matter. And trail building was one of the things that I'd kind of thought about.
I heard in another interview that you said you felt a little nervous about approaching these two people, even though you knew them. Tell me about that. What was that about?
I guess, you always feel nervous. Like, it's a weird thing to ask someone, like, can I follow you through the woods for 9 months? It's kind of, I don't know, it's putting yourself out there. And I didn't know what they were going to say, and I really wanted to do it. So yeah, I don't know. I just felt nervous because I didn't know what the outcome was going to be.
You know, how did your perspective about what you were going to be taking on sort of change from that sort of initial foray into asking them, hey, can I follow you around, to actually being out there? Because 9 months is a long period of time to be dedicated to photographing anything. Mm-hmm. But tell us about how what you expected compared to what you actually faced going out there on a regular basis to photograph them doing their work.
I think that I underestimated how repetitive the work was going to be. That was a major challenge for me, is that they're doing the same thing, the same like 5 tasks or whatever over and over and over again. And it's just 2 people alone in the woods doing this, and trying to make visual variety out of that, I think, was really hard. And that was something that I really underestimated. And as well, I think that the pace of the work really surprised me. They worked much harder than I thought they were going to. They worked harder than they thought they were going to. They finished the trail in half the time that they had allotted. And so at the beginning, I tried to really kind of pace myself and not go out super often, just try to be there for the bigger moments, because if I tried to be there every time, that I would just burn myself out. But because they were finishing so much more quickly than we anticipated, then I had to start really pushing myself to be out there all the time, not even getting to review my pictures or anything, just always out there. And that really did burn me out. And the quality of my work really took a nosedive during that time, because I wasn't able to reflect or anything on what I'd done. I didn't know what I needed to do next. Mm-hmm. I was really tired. So yeah, I worked the hardest during that end part, and I accomplished the least.
Well, really, that's interesting. For people who may not hit the trails on a bike or even on foot, can you give us a description of what these people were doing? What was the work involved in doing it? Because some people might think a trail is just like moving away brush, but it's pretty extensive, right, especially since, you know, the intent is for both hikers and cyclists to be on these paths.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So the first thing they had to do was to choose where it was going to go. And so that involved picking terrain that wasn't too steep, and as well terrain where the right sorts of materials would be available, like the right kind of dirt to make the finished trail bed, the right amount of rocks to kind of fill in holes and whatever. And so once the rough line had been chosen, then there's in this area anyway, I think the way dirt is different in different parts of the world. But in this area, there's like a layer of organic soil, like dead plants and whatever, that needed to be stripped away first. And then underneath that is kind of this more clay or sand-like dirt that's harder. And so they would dig down to that, and then the terrain would undulate a fair bit. And so they would fill in the undulations with walls of rock, and then they would cover the whole thing in another layer of that kind of sandy clay-like dirt, and then pack it down.
And so how often were they out there, and how often were you out there photographing them?
So they were out there 2 to 3 weekdays per week, and 1 to 2 days on the weekends. On weekdays, they were out for like 3 to 4 hours a day, and the weekends between 8 and 11 hours per day. And their longest day was 14 hours. I was out there a total of 35 times during the project, mostly on weekends, but a number of weekdays as well. So I definitely wasn't out there as much as they were, but they were out there a lot.
So you had mentioned before that you started recognizing that a lot of the stuff that they were doing was very repetitive. Mm-hmm. So when you started going out there and you started realizing that, what were some of the choices that you had to start making to make sure that you had not just a variety of images, but a variety of images that when they came together in the form of these prints or on the web, that they told a story? Because, you know, you're out there for a long time, and like you said, you know, you can make the same images over and over again. How are you sort of pushing yourself to really think about, you know, filling in all the gaps in terms of the story that you were trying to tell?
I tried to pay attention to what they were feeling as they were working. We spent a lot of time talking, and at home I went and I took notes about what I heard them say about what they were feeling. And so I made this list of like 25 feelings or themes that I wanted to try to hit on. And then before I would go out shooting, I would kind of glance through that list and be like, oh, pride, for example. Oh, I don't really have any pictures yet that represent pride. Okay, I'm going to try to think about that and try to think about how I could represent pride today. And then I would head out.
There must have been moments where they were frustrated, because sometimes I can see from some of the photographs that they were working out in the rain, and just a variety of things that they couldn't possibly anticipate, and all of a sudden they have to sort of contend with. What were those experiences that they had, and what were your own experiences in terms of feeling like frustrated or stuck during that whole process? Yeah,
they felt frustrated from time to time. I think what really helped them was the amount of community support that slowly formed around them. So they know other trail builders and whatever, and slowly people started to volunteer their own time to kind of help come out and keep them company and to put in work, and I think that was really helpful for them. In particular, there was a couple, Alex and Maddie, who stumbled on the trail when they were out walking their dog, and they left a note saying how awesome they thought the trail was, and they left some beer. And they ended up meeting Martin and Penny, the two trail builders, and they became friends, and they worked together quite a bit. And so I think that kind of sense of community really helped them through. For myself, I guess it was their company, because I don't know if I ever felt frustrated, but I certainly felt down on myself that I wasn't, towards the end when there was a lot of work, but I wasn't accomplishing anything. I definitely felt down on myself. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that would kind of start to melt away a little bit when I would be out there in the forest with them, just trying to think visually. That experience of just kind of getting lost, taking pictures helped a little bit. But yeah, I would come home and I would, feel sad again. And I just kind of had to pick myself up and keep going, really.
Well, what was that sort of sadness about for you? What was the block that you were feeling in the midst of that? Because you can go through these phases, especially when you're involved in something for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. Can you speak more to what those feelings were about?
Well, I think that it's kind of similar to something that you've talked about in the past, where you've talked about your fears about making photos or making books or doing this podcast. Maybe it's not going to be very good. Maybe people won't like it. But you've talked about, in particular, about how these fears manifested as feelings that you needed permission to do these things. Mm-hmm. So like, I can't do this podcast because I don't have a degree in podcasting or whatever, right? And I found that for me, those kind of feelings manifested in needing permission to continue. So in particular, like I would talk to my friends about this project, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm still out shooting, or yeah, I'm still editing, or yeah, I'm still working on those captions. And my friends would get kind of bored about hearing this. And so I would feel like I didn't have their permission to continue. And sort of semi-similarly, my poor girlfriend, she kind of felt like this project was the mistress in our relationship.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so I definitely, when I heard that, I definitely felt like I didn't have her permission to continue. And sometimes in the evenings, I would just procrastinate, and I would work on things that were easier, that I didn't have to, that I knew I could do. Like I'd just go and edit some photo from a trip or something that didn't matter. And so what I learned from you is that all of these things were really just my fears manifest. These needs for permission were my fears manifesting in kind of a weird way. Because it's the case that I don't need my friends' permission to do this. And of course, they were really happy for me when it came out. They were supportive. They're good friends. And with my girlfriend, like, of course, I had her permission to do it, but I just needed to learn how to balance my time better and how to incorporate her more into the project. And then, your words helped me see the procrastination for what it really was. So I don't think I have a lot of insight about getting over that fear specifically, although I want to talk about the fear more later. But your words really helped me take control of my feelings and understand them. And when I understood them, I was able to control them a little bit better. And so that really helped me out a lot.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm glad I could be of help. When you started making these pictures, when did you start realizing that you wanted to do more than just photograph it? When did you start having this idea for how you wanted to share the photographs?
Well, that idea came from you as well. So in episode 142, it's called In Conversation 2. Yeah. Not only do you talk about this fear thing, which made obviously a huge impact on me, but also at the end of it, you're interviewed by Martin Taylor. And he asks you at the end, who is your one photographer be that you would recommend and why? And you said Zoe Strauss. And you said her because she did this project in Philadelphia where she photographed this neighborhood for 10 years. And every year she put up a gallery outside underneath a highway overpass. And it's called Under I-95. And so every year she'd put up this gallery so that people in the neighborhood could see the pictures that she had been taking of them. And that idea really stuck with me. And I kind of just like the whole episode stuck with me. And I filed it away in my subconscious. So one night when I was out with the trailbuilders, we're at the pub hanging out, and they're always just bursting with ideas about this project, about their trail and their project. And in particular, they had kept really detailed notes of the number of hours that they had worked, the number of feet of trail they'd built per day, of who helped them, of how long that person worked, et cetera, et cetera. And one of them suddenly had the idea that they could put up markers along the trail to show how far they got every month. So like you'd be riding or walking along the trail, and then suddenly you'd see this marker, and you'd see, and it would say like month 1, and then you'd go a little bit further, and then you would see month 2, and you'd kind of think like, oh, that took me 2 minutes to ride, but it took them a month to build. And then this idea from Zoe Strauss just suddenly jumped into my head, and I blurted out, oh, and I can put up pictures by those markers. And eventually the trail builders kind of felt like putting up those markers would be a bit too kind of self-aggrandizing. They're pretty humble people, kind of, despite what I did to them. But this idea of putting up photos along the trail just kind of stuck and took on a life of its own.
And tell us about, creating these prints and the logistics in terms of getting them up there, securing them, protecting them from the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing with the prints was figuring out how big they were going to be. I was pretty worried that if I tried to figure that out in my apartment, that I would just get the wrong answer, because being in your apartment is just a different kind of scale than being in the forest. So I went and bought a bunch of different sized pieces of white paper and made some different sized photographic prints, and just like hauled them out to the forest, and we held them up, and we were like, oh, it's this one. No, that one doesn't really work. Oh, how about this one? And then eventually picked something. And then the second part was figuring out the materials, because here in Vancouver, it rains a lot. And so the pictures needed to be waterproof. And as well, I figured that they needed to be UV resistant, because oftentimes there's like a beam of sunlight that comes through the trees, and I was worried that it would like hit part of the picture and then just kind of like slowly move its way across part of it and cause the colors to shift on only a portion of it, which would look really ugly. So I called around quite a bit and eventually found a place that kind of specializes in outdoor printing. And so they printed the stuff on this plastic material called Sintra, and it's waterproof with UV resistant ink, and it's laminated. And the prints really withstood the weather very well. I was quite impressed. But the trick with working with them was that they're kind of used to corporate clients and printing things like logos, rather than printing like higher fidelity stuff like photographs. And so the first prints from them came back really kind of lacking in contrast, and with the blacks really kind of choked up for some reason. And so working with them was a little bit tricky. I ended up spending like a month making like reference prints of this is how I want it to look. And I'd get these prints, and I'd bring them home, and I'd turn off all the lights because it was going to be really dark in the forest. So I'd look at the prints like in the dark and be like, okay, I think this is about what it should look like. This face needs to be brighter or whatever. And then I brought those reference prints into them, and from there they were able to make things that looked really good. And
tell me about securing them in the forest, because I know that theft was a concern.
Yes. So around here, in particular, in the last few months, there's been a number of signs that have been stolen or have been defaced. And so I was definitely worried about that. So I did a number of things to try to reduce the chances of that happening. And I have no idea if any of them were successful or not. It could easily be that all the sign stealing people were like on vacation or whatever while they were out. But they ended up not being stolen or defaced. And I did a bunch of things. And so I don't know if they worked. But in particular, I started by writing an article about them in a mountain bike website, and I wanted to try to set the tone and explain who I was and why I was doing it, because I was worried that if these things just kind of appeared in the middle of nowhere, that people might not know who I was or question my motivations, or maybe assume the worst, and that might kind of set things off on the wrong foot. So I started by writing an article. The next thing I did was I made it clear at the site that the installation was temporary. And that was some advice that I got from the local mountain bike association, and it was excellent advice. That's something I easily would have overlooked, making it clear that it was going to be temporary. But I think that helped. I tried to make the prints look good. I spent quite a bit of money on them, and I feel like if I'd spent half the money, that they would have been maybe four times more likely to be defaced or something, because people wouldn't have valued them as much, I think. In the subject matter, I wanted to kind of touch on some potentially controversial topics, but I tried to be really careful about the language I used, so that if somebody read what I had to say about those topics and had a different point of view, that they wouldn't be offended. So I spent a lot of time kind of sanding off the rough edges when I was talking about those topics.
Can you give me an example of what one of those topics was?
Yeah. So around this kind of community, the idea of there being secrets in the forest is kind of maybe offensive to some people. They feel like, oh, this is public land. I should be able to go where I want. You shouldn't be allowed to hide things from me. But secrecy was one of kind of the key parts of this project. It was part of the flavor. Like, we were out every day, kind of sneaking around the forest a little bit, and it was fun. But it also served an important purpose, which was that while the trail was being built, it kind of ended in the middle of nowhere. And so if somebody had discovered it and had ridden up it, they would have just ended up in the middle of nowhere, and they'd have to ride back down. But the trail wasn't built for riding back down. The corners are tighter and they're not banked, and so it'd be much harder to ride down without skidding and damaging the trail. And so while the trail didn't end anywhere, it kind of had to be secret to prevent that kind of damage from happening. And so I tried to kind of carefully explain that idea without offending somebody who might believe that everything should be open to them all the time.
During my career as a photographer, I have bought and used a lot of tripods. And early on, I made the mistake of going cheap, only to regret it later. Because in most cases, those tripods didn't hold up over time, or they failed to provide the stability that I needed when it counted. That's why I've been really impressed with the durability and the stability MePhoto provides at a very affordable price. I've been using a MePhoto tripod for my travels for the past 3 years, and they have never disappointed. Their latest series of tripod and monopods, the MePhoto Airs, build on that stellar reputation. They are 30% lighter than the classic MePhoto models and provide super fast setup with its new Hyperlock leg system, which allows you to set up and collapse the tripod quickly and single-handedly. It's available in several different models and in 7 brilliant colors. Check them out and order one today. You can save 15% off your purchase by using the promo code TheCandidFrame when you visit mephoto.com. That's MEFOTO.com. Tell me about the choice of the 20 images, because you were shooting, for 9 months, and God knows how many photographs you took during that period of time.
21,000. What is it? 21,262.
Oh, Jesus! So how do you get from that high number to 20 selects? Because people have a hard time making selects from just a couple of hundred shots, much less several thousand. Yeah. So that was that was definitely a challenge. I guess I did it in waves. So for each day that I was out, I picked kind of my favorite pictures from that day and did the processing on those, and then put them in a folder. Then once that was finished, I went through all of those. That was, still a large collection. I went through all of those and I picked out my favorites from that, and then I made small 4x6 prints of them. So I took that stack of prints and spread them out on the floor of my apartment, and then brought out my list of themes or emotions. And then I tried to kind of match things up. And how can I select a group of prints that kind of maximally covers this set of themes that I want to talk about, while also being of good visual quality. I went through a lot of back and forth, kind of very slowly whittling down. I found that for me, the process of really living with the pictures helped me out a lot. Like leaving them on my floor and encountering them every day kind of really helped me sort through my feelings about them. Mm-hmm. Like
like if there might be two that represented a similar thing, and I didn't know which one to pick, I would just leave them in a place where I would walk by them all the time, and kind of slowly, subconsciously, I would figure it out. And it's a weird process that I've experienced again and again that I can't explain very well, but it definitely happens. And I've read about other people having done this. I mean, that was where I got the idea from, and it works great. So yeah, I kind of used that to slowly whittle down. And then once I had some that I thought were potentially going to be the set, I enlisted various friends, I think about 6 friends, and I showed them the pictures and talked about the captions that I was thinking about writing for them, and then listened to their reactions. And I made a bunch of refinements from that.
Feedback is important, but I think that what's often key is being careful about who you choose to provide you the feedback.
Yeah.
Tell me about that part of it, the choices you made in terms of who you wanted to show the pictures to and solicit their comments about.
Well, I think for the biggest thing was that it would be people who would dig in and really take the time to look at them and to give me thoughtful feedback. And so I picked kind of close friends for that reason. And I tried to have a mix of people who are into photography, of people who are into outdoor stuff, and people who didn't know anything about either of those things. Because I felt like the potential group of people who would encounter this would be all of those. So then it was a process of sitting down with them and being really attentive and open to what they had to say to try to elicit as much from them as I possibly could. Because if I start shutting them down, if they've got something to say, it's hard to tell somebody that their work isn't very good. And if they kind of begin down that path and I shut them down, then I miss out on gaining information. And so really trying to listen and to encourage that was pretty key, I think.
This work has a presence online as well, and you have some other intents for it in terms of for sharing them. Tell me about the difference between the way you chose to display it out along the trail and elsewhere.
Yeah, that was something that kind of ended up taking me by surprise with this, was that it's ended up being 2 projects in one. So the first project being, the in-person gallery, and the second project being like this internet fantasy that exists. So for the in-person gallery, I tried to make it as self-contained an experience as I could. So at any place that some random person might encounter it, like at all the different trail intersections, I put up informational posters that explained what the project was, some of the themes that I hoped that people would get from it. And there was a map showing where you were and where the beginning of the project was and where the end was. And then so that way, if a person encountered it, then if they were really keen, then they could go back to the beginning and see the whole thing. Or they could just look at the one picture that was there and maybe get something from that. Or they could just ignore it altogether. But I wanted it to be a complete experience in itself. And one thing that was about that, I guess, it was seen by a smaller number of people, like maybe however many 100 people happened to go out to the trail. But there is a lot more kind of bandwidth for information there. With 20 pictures and 20 captions, you can get a lot of information across. And so there is a fair number of themes around loneliness and whatever that I tried to get across there. But in the internet version, there's much less bandwidth. And so that kind of began with that article I mentioned that I wrote to try to set the tone. In that version of the project, for the people who didn't encounter it in real life, it exists more as a fantasy, as like, what would it be like to see an art gallery in the forest? The pictures that people that encounter it online see are they're all kind of smushed together on a web page, right? Like there's a picture of this image, there's a picture of that image, they're all put together. Whereas in the in-person gallery, there's quite a bit of space between each picture. So that experience is pretty different. But also there's just much less bandwidth. Like, when you click on a link, you kind of skim through an article and then move on to the next thing very quickly. So there's not a lot of room to expand on, to convey a lot of information and to expand on themes. And so I had a much shorter message there of the fantasy of an art gallery in the forest, of like, hey, trail builders are awesome. I hope you understand more about what they do. And also I tried to tack on a message about there being no conflict between mountain bikers and hikers, because that's something that's there's been a small number of isolated incidents around here that don't reflect the larger picture in any way, but they're the ones that that have kind of made their way into the public consciousness. And so I wanted to use this as an opportunity to kind of push back against that and say like, hey, that's not actually reality. That's not actually what happens. That we all live together in harmony.
This project ended up taking on a sort of a life of its own. And so that you got interviewed on television as part of the results. So tell me about this becoming more than you sort of had anticipated, and how did that come about?
It came about mostly by accident. The whole thing was kind of an accident. Like, I didn't plan any of this at the beginning. So as an example, this only works if the trail goes uphill for bikes, because if it goes downhill for bikes, like, you can't stop in the middle of your ride to see the pictures, and it would be dangerous. It would be bad for the trail to have people stopping in the same spot. But when the trailbuilders first told me that the trail was going to be uphill, I was disappointed. I was like, oh, I wanted to see a downhill trail. So definitely all of this was accidental. But I think that the way that it came about was kind of twofold. One is that I sort of, through luck and whatever, hit on this idea that is pretty shareable. And in particular, like, I don't think it's news that people on Facebook kind of try to represent their best selves. And certainly for outdoor projects, part of one's best, or for outdoor people, often part of one's best self is supporting trail builders. And so by sharing this project, people can kind of reflect part of their best self. But more importantly than that, it's also a bit surprising. And I can kind of prove that the surprising bit was really a big part of sharing, because I wrote 2 articles, one at the beginning and one at the end, because I didn't want the project to come down silently either. Mm-hmm. And for that second article, I tried to make it better than the first. Like, the pictures were better than the first because I had more time to take them. I tried to pack more information in about the impact that these trails had on the mountain, and I had maps of where people ride before and after. I tried to reflect on some behind-the-scenes stuff. Like, I think objectively that second article is better, but it was shared 1/10 as much because it's not surprising. So I knew that I kind of had this thing that could be shareable, and so I just contacted news outlets. I just wrote emails. And in fact, for the first TV appearance, it was a producer at the TV station who happened to be a trail builder himself, and he saw my first article and wanted to have us on. So he actually called Penny because he had her number. He didn't contact me. It was kind of weird. Like, oh, how did he get a hold of her? It wasn't until later that we pieced this all together. And so from that first TV appearance really emboldened me, I guess. I was like, wow, I could be on TV. This is amazing. And so that really emboldened me for contacting other TV stations, for radio, for newspaper, that kind of thing. And it took off.
That must have been really affirming, though, to realize, oh, there are people who are going to be really interested in this, even if they never hit the trail. Mm-hmm. What perspective did that help bring to what you were doing?
Well, see, I think the interesting thing is that it was only affirming for a while. Like, I said earlier about how I kind of needed permission from myself to continue working on the project before it came out. And then there was this brief period where at the beginning, everybody was super excited. And then I kind of finally felt like I had this external permission, this external validation or whatever. But then as the online stuff continued, again, my friends got bored of it. And I was kind of right back to where I was again, of like, these things are happening and I'm excited about them. But when I talk to other people, they're a bit more like, oh yeah, oh, another newspaper. All right, yeah, whatever. Yeah, good for you. Mm-hmm. So how about that weather, Yeah, so it was kind of only this brief period, I think, that was really affirming. Yeah, I don't know. I think the whole thing is just a struggle with yourself, a struggle with your feelings.
We talked about fear earlier. So what do you feel like you learned about yourself in terms of how you contend with fear when it comes to committing yourself to a project? It doesn't necessarily have to run this duration of time. It's just any project that you decide to sort of take on. How's your relationship with fear changed as a result of this?
Well, I think that the thing that I was scared of was, of course, failure. And the thing about this project was that I did fail. I failed a ton. I realized that with this media stuff that I have this polished exterior of TV appearances and newspapers and whatever, but that just kind of covers over, I think, the amount that I actually did fail. So for example, we talked about I took 20,000 pictures and put up 20. So that that success rate of 1 in 1,000 meant that for every 1,000 times that I pressed the shutter button, I failed 999 times. Even with 20,000 pictures to choose from, 3 of the result, I think, were not at whatever level of photographer that I try to be. You know, wherever I am with my abilities pushing forward, 3 of them weren't there. And I missed photos that I wanted to take. Like I mentioned, being at the pub. Well, I really wanted a picture of being at the pub because I thought that was an important part of it. It would add visual variety. But every time we were at the pub, I was too scared to strap a big flash to my camera and stand up and take a picture. I really wanted to get a picture of them building in the snow, but on the day that it snowed, I was too tired to go out, and so I told myself it would happen again, and it didn't. And there was another day where there was these beautiful rays of sun coming through the mist in the forest, and I know it was there because my Facebook feed was full of it for the next 2 days. But again, I didn't feel like going out that day. I went and rode my bike instead, and I saw it, and I missed out on getting pictures of it. I also mentioned making a list of themes, and there were several of the themes that I missed. I missed having a picture of a feeling of leaving a legacy that they felt like they were doing. I missed having a picture of being in danger because there's often dead trees that are along the trail and standing along the trail, and they might fall over and hurt somebody, and so they needed to be taken down in a controlled way, and that was quite dangerous. And I didn't get any pictures of that feeling. And then, most importantly, most kind of dear to my heart was hearing people nearby. Like we were kind of working in secret. We could see other people riding by, but they weren't aware of us, and that was really fun. And I don't have any pictures that represent that feeling. And lastly, I think that maybe the biggest thing that I failed with was that the medium ended up being bigger than the message, where when people talk about this project, they say like, oh, hey, that was cool. You had these pictures along the trail, or yeah, trailbuilders are awesome. But the other themes that I wanted to be represented in the work they never seem to come up. Like whether it's talking to somebody in person or reading comments online or whatever, they just don't come up. And that makes me feel like I didn't communicate very well. And so when I was first preparing to talk to you, I was talking through this with my girlfriend, and I was going to come on here and say that I felt like this project was one failure after another that only succeeded in spite of itself. And she said that she was really surprised to hear this and that she didn't agree with it. And so I was like, okay, well, challenge accepted. You know, I'll show you who's a failure. And so I went and I wrote down this list. And it's going to sound kind of stupid and obvious, I guess, but just the fact of writing it down made me realize that I had exaggerated it in my head significantly. And in particular, like I talk about this list of themes, I had like 25 things on it. I haven't looked at that list in quite a while, and ever since I was editing. But I pulled it out again while I was preparing for this. And before I looked at it, in my head, I guessed that I probably missed about 50% of them. That was just kind of what I felt. I'm like, yeah, I think it's going to be about half. And I listed off 3 just now. There's maybe another 1 or 2 that are debatable out of 25. So that's like 15 or 20%, which is a ways away from half. Mm-hmm. And similarly, when I haven't looked at the pictures for a while, I kind of start to feel like about half of them again are below whatever my ability is, or where I'm trying to push myself forward. And it's not until I go and look at them again that, oh no, it really is just that 3. The rest of them, they are kind of at the level of my ability. And they were, challenging for me to make. So that difference again of 50% versus 15%. And so what I learned is that my perceptions of my failure are definitely different than reality. And so when I encounter polished work, when I encounter somebody else's polished work, and I see just their successes, it really makes me feel intimidated because I'm comparing their successes against the failures that I feel about my own work. Yeah. And then further, like what I've learned from this is that my perceptions of my failures are exaggerated. And so there's kind of these two steps where, yeah, first it's versus the failures, and then it's versus this exaggerated perception of the failures. And so I feel really intimidated when I look at other people's work. And so that's why I wanted to come on here and talk about my failures, because I know that I have a polished exterior, but I want to talk about my failures so that I can maybe help to narrow the gap for somebody else.
Oh, yeah, I completely relate to that. I mean, our perspective of our own accomplishments is severely distorted because we often fixate on the failures. And we're not privy to what other people's experiences is typically, unless, they sort of volunteer that. So I think that's something I know I relate to, and I think probably a lot of people who are listening to this relate to as well. And I think that one of the great things about you doing this is the fact you had an idea and you saw it through. And I think there's so many people that never even get that far. So regardless of what the sort of quality or the reaction to the content is, it's the idea that you went on the journey, that you made the photographs, that you learned from them, because no one is ever going to be satisfied completely with the work that they've done. But if they've set out a challenge for themselves, it ends up, especially for photographers, it's not just about whether or not the photographs made it to the quality level that they had set out for themselves. It's whether or not they were able to surmount all the obstacles and all the moods and all that stuff that usually stops you from seeing it through. And the fact that you're able to see it through to the end and that and end up being manifested itself in this really beautiful way is a real compliment and a testament to your abilities as a photographer and as an artist and as a creator to be able to do it. So yeah, not everything turned out the way you might have liked it to, but you made it, you created it, and then you take the lessons from that and you move on to the next project.
Yeah. Thank you.
What were the reactions to the trail builders to everything when it was done?
I think a lot of bemusement. I guess elation would be the first one, because when that first TV producer called Penny, man, her and I were just on the phone and we were giddy. So that was certainly the beginning. I think that there was probably a bit of discomfort about suddenly being high profile. That they're also instructors for a mountain bike, like they're mountain bike coaches, and they teach sometimes around the United States, and even though we're all based in Canada, and they've been recognized like over on the East Coast, and that was like a pretty surprising and kind of weird and amusing experience for them. Yeah, I don't know, they're really pleased that we've been able to raise awareness about trail building. And yeah, I don't know.
And now that you've completed it, what's next for you?
That question digs into my deepest, darkest fears, because I am so worried that I am never going to have an idea this good again. So I think that the answer to that for me is to redefine what success means. And instead of success being about having a lot of people seeing the work, I think I need to make a left turn, have success mean something else. And so for me, when I think about success right now in my life, I think about my girlfriend. I think that she is the most successful thing that I have going. I'm over the moon. I'm so in love with her. I love spending every minute with her. And so I think that's what success looks like. And so I think that finding a way of incorporating her into work is what success looks like for me later on. So specifically, she's a physician, and she's expressed some interest in volunteering in a place like Nepal to teach at a hospital there for a little while. And I would love to accompany her on that and to take pictures of her work and the other work done by whatever organization she ends up being with, and just of life there. And I am well aware that any pictures that I take will not be any better or different or more surprising than the hundreds or thousands of other people that have done this before. Mm-hmm. But if I'm doing that with her, then that looks like success to me.
That's awesome. Well, my last question is I ask each guest to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Yeah, I think it's a guy named John Goldsmith, and he's a street photographer here in Vancouver. What I really like about his work is that his style is very distinctive. You know, when you go out onto the street, if you've ever tried to take street photographs, it's just chaos of people moving around, and you don't have any control over it. And yet he is able to consistently go out and take pictures that are very recognizable. I mean, even the throwaway stuff on his Facebook is all in his style. And it's some kind of combination of mostly how he sees and a little bit of the processing. And I can't put my finger on it, even though I think I would be quite successful in picking his pictures out of a lineup a pretty high percentage of the time. And I just really admire that he's able to do that so consistently and so well.
Thank you so much, man, for reaching out and sitting down with talk with me this morning. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it too. This has been a real pleasure for me. It's been a fantasy of mine for a long time to talk to you and to be on this show. And I'm really over the moon.
Thanks to Euan Forrester for joining us here at The Candid Frame. You can check out his work by visiting euanforresterphotography.com. That's spelled EUANFORRESTR photography.com. You can support the show by making a regular monthly contribution through Patreon. You can contribute amounts of $2, $5, $10 or more, or anything in between on a monthly basis, and help make a big difference to the work we do here at TCF. And lastly, I'm working on joining photographer and fellow podcaster Martin Bailey for his Hokkaido winter landscape photography adventure at the beginning of January, and I hope to see some of you there. You can find out more about this wonderful experience by visiting martinbaileyphotography.com and clicking on the link in the show notes. To access our complete archive of interviews, download the free Candid Frame app available for Apple iOS, Android, and Windows. Links for each can be found in the show notes and the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. Our senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.